Hello, welcome to Take Heart Journey. I'm so glad you're here. I have a really special week this week because we have a guest speaking to us on our theme. And it was really important to me that when we discussed this beatitude, which is blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, it was very important to me that this week not be trite. I take this very seriously, knowing that there are people in this very community who are mourning or have mourned and who will mourn. I think every theology needs to have space for people who are grieving, and I think Jesus made that a priority too, as we see in this beatitude. So the person that I thought of to speak to us on this topic is my friend Angenette Crume. And professionally, she is a licensed mental health counselor. She spends her days on Zoom, working with clients. And so you can imagine what it's been like being a therapist through this pandemic. And she also has her own baking company, and I have tried the cookies and they are absolutely delicious. And as if that's not enough, she's also a self-worth coach. And so she professionally is always working hard, educating herself, and in one way or another, feeding people's souls. And so she's a wonderful person for us to hear from today. And, you know, I can't help but add that personally, Angie is an amazing friend. She's someone I worked with maybe 15 years ago now. We reconnected when she joined one of the first Take Heart cohorts, and she scheduled a call with me after those 5 weeks, and the whole point of that call was her just encouraging me with Take Heart and where Take Heart is going. And she said almost verbatim, just so you know, I'm going to stick around. And so I am always grateful for friends who stick around and who support my dreams. And so I've also professionally utilized her as a coach. And so a lot of momentum that Take Heart has had recently has come from her advice and her help. So all that said, you will find that Angenette is a genuine and powerful voice as she speaks about the topic, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
Matthew 5, verses 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Mourning is the process of confronting your grief. Grief is one of those emotions that we often run away from and try to suppress because they're uncomfortable. The grieving process is often difficult, and we don't quite know what to do with it. You know, how do you honor and mourn the things that you have lost? And when we talk about grief, grief can come from any type of loss, whether it's the loss of a physical item, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a goal or a dream. But loss comes in all shapes and sizes, and we often don't deal with them as we should. And so as you see, this passage is telling us that blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So you have to face that grief. You have to lean into that grief in order to find the comfort on the other side. It's often that our grief is attached to something much deeper than the person, place, or thing that was lost. It is the belief that's behind those things, right? The hope, the faith that you have placed in there, the love that you have placed in this thing. And so when you lose it, it's almost like you're displacing that love, that hope, and that faith. And so when you lean into your mourning and your grief, you are able to then tap back into the love, the hope, and the faith, and you hold on to that as the sadness and everything else fades. And so as time goes on, the memories tend to be more positive and life-giving than the sadness and the sorrow attached to it. But again, you have to go through the process of mourning. And God's promise to you is that you will be comforted when you mourn. So as you paint, I want you to envision God with his arms open to you, telling you to come, to lay down your grief at his feet, to mourn your loss, and feel his love, his comfort, his joy flowing back into you as you release your grief and your sadness and all the feelings connected to your loss. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
That was so powerful and helpful. Thank you again, Angie. I hope that you enjoyed what she shared and enjoyed the art project that we're going to make this week. I have another little 5x5 wooden board that I used this week, and I'm still loving these. I'm still like really, really enjoying them. And let me tell you the main supplies that I used for this. First of all, I used this brush again that I used on the last journal page, and I did the same technique that I did on that journal page where I used this to create texture. And so this background is maybe one of my favorite backgrounds ever. It almost looks like worn leather. And the way that I did that is I used gesso and then just kind of went like this, and so that there were lots of peaks and lots of texture, and let it dry, and then did it again. And then when I did a wash, it kind of came alive. So one of the key elements this week is actually patience. There's a lot of drying time. For me, in between those two gesso layers, like that was one of the keys to creating this texture, was like fully letting it dry. I know, right? I should probably do that more often. And then the other thing is that these beautiful figures are made with texture paste. And you could do it with texture paste. You could do it with super heavy gesso. You could do it with modeling paste. You could even do it with matte gel mixed with paint. And I, as someone who loves texture, I've experimented with all of those things, and there's pros and cons. I think that what I've found is that texture paste is the one that's easiest to shape. And so there's some things I like better about super heavy gesso. There's some things I like better about even modeling paste, but texture paste for me is the easiest one to work with. And so that's what I did. I used a palette knife and texture paste, and then a couple different shades of paint. I used gold, I used green, like a burgundy purple, I used brown, black, and then a beige color. And so that's pretty much all that I did. I also used my Stabilo all at the very end, but I really like the simplicity of this piece, that you look at it and know exactly what it is, even though it's like the most rudimentary shapes. And I think it's packs a powerful punch, but that it's not that hard to make. And so I hope that you will pull out any texture making elements that you have, and we can create together. So let's go. All right, let's get started on this week's project. I am using this paintbrush that's really inspired me lately, because it's not this perfect paintbrush with really neat strokes. And so it means that you immediately know that the background is going to be imperfect. It's not going to be smooth. It's going to have texture. And so that was just what I was looking for this canvas. I really liked the background that we made in the journal for our last tutorial. And so as I was putting this down, I was thinking I'm gonna just start almost stamping the brush like I'm doing here, and it gives this effect where there's little points to the gesso. And I did this twice. So I let this layer completely dry, and then I did another layer with gesso, and so I ended up with this really awesome texture that turned into one of my favorite backgrounds ever. So now I have a mixture of burnt sienna and black. And the cool thing that I realized here was just thinking about all the different blacks and how not all browns and blacks are the same. I thought that that was such a rich color. And then I'm taking my paper towel and I am rubbing a lot of it off. And these different layers of color, I think, are all what came together to make the background what I loved at the end. And I could not have done this part unless the gesso was completely dry. And so if you want to recreate this project, I think that Angie has given us enough to think about for lots of layers. And so make a layer, take your time, make a layer, and then step away and let it dry, and then come back to it and make another layer. And I wonder if as you create, slowly in increments, you'll also have more time to fully digest everything that Angie shared. So now I've still mixed that burnt sienna and black, but this just has more black to it. And I've put it around the outside because I know that my two figures are going to be in the middle, but I really wanted there to be a little bit of variation in the background. And so the edges are going to be a little bit darker and the middle is going to be a little bit lighter. Okay, now I'm going to use white charcoal pencil to sketch in the guidelines. This is going to show me when I come in with my texture piece and my palette knife. It's going to help me have an idea of where I want to put it and how I want to sculpt it. And so the reason I am using a white charcoal pencil is, first of all, it shows up on my dark background, but also it's water soluble. So you will see me come in with a paper towel that has a little bit of water on it, and using that I can just erase the lines that I'm not using. So you could sketch your lines in with anything that you have. If you want to do it like this, you could use anything water soluble, including a Stabilo awl. That just wouldn't have shown up on this background. Alright, it's texture paste time, and this part was so much fun and also so meditative because it takes really all of your focus to do this, and provides for me a moment of being in the flow where really this is the only thing that my mind and my body can be focused on. And it was really fun to use this palette knife to shape out the figures that I was picturing and kind of watch them become 3D. And I recommend a smaller palette knife for this because I found that this gave me more control in staying in those lines that I had sketched. And you are welcome to make these same figures, and you could do any configuration you want. I can picture so many beautiful little tableaus just with people in this shape, but you can also use texture paste to make whatever you want. I know that we have done this same technique before to make pumpkins, but this is showing you that really the sky is the limit when it comes to your texture medium and your imagination and your creativity. All right, now that my figures are completely dry, which once again took a little while, I am ready to paint them. And one thing that I learned from using texture paste to make a lot of pumpkins this fall is that the texture paste sucks up the paint. And what ends up happening is that when I first put the paint down, it looks really vibrant, but it kind of dulls down and it's almost turns into a color that is white and the color that I have painted. And so what that means is that you need to kind of do an underlayer of painting on texture paste. And so I'm going to do that with this figure here. I'm going to give it some gold and a little bit of burgundy so that when I am painting on top of that, those colors will kind of show through instead of white. And for this one, I was just picturing doing 2 layers of this color, which I believe is called wine red. But you will see what I end up doing that I think looks so cool. It is time to add the next layer, and I have hunter green and I also have a little bit of brown on the side, and I am using that to try to add some lights and some darks and some shadow to the figure. And I really love how this looks because at the edges and in certain places there's some gold that is shining through, and that underlayer really worked for me. I am now color mixing over on the right to try to find some skin colors, and this is a work that is very abstract, right? There's just a couple of shapes that are put together that give you the idea of 2 people embracing. And so I'm not going to make, facial features, and I'm not going to make this too realistic, but I did want to try to get some real skin tones on here. And so that's what I was doing on the side with those marks, just to see if the colors that I had mixed were what I was picturing. And I am going to add a little bit of light to each face and a little bit of dark just for the places where the light would hit and where the shadows would fall. And after painting my little figures, I'm now going to use my Stabilo All to outline everything, and then I will use a wet paintbrush to darken that line a little bit. And the Stabilo All is the perfect thing for texture like this because it can really make it so that there's no white texture paste showing on the sides, and it also really helps our focal point here to completely stand out. As you watch me complete the final details, including a layer of gold, I want to leave you with Angie's prompt for us as we paint this week.
But again, you have to go through the process of mourning. And God's promise to you is that you will be comforted when you mourn. So as you paint, I want you to envision God with his arms open to you, telling you to come, to lay down your grief at his feet, to mourn your loss, and feel his love, his comfort, his joy flowing back into you as you release your grief and your sadness and all the feelings connected to your loss. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.